Hello, hello, welcome, welcome. International Women's Day, how exciting. I'm Claire Snowdon-Darling, and for those of you who don't know me, I usually specialise in hormones and emotional transformation. So I'm known to a lot of people for my work in things like anxiety, adrenal fatigue, menopause, and other hormone issues. And today I want to talk to you about why it's vitally important to be talking about women's issues now. And although I'm really known for my health and emotional work, I actually came to this work through my journey because I was so poorly. And yes, I did a huge amount of work on my physical health. However, the biggest part of my journey has been my spiritual growth, actually. And it was through that work that I shifted my perspective the most. And that work started probably in my teens, actually, with things like Reiki and, I was interested in crystals and things. And then when I started retraining as an alternative health practitioner, I then actually went and qualified in Reiki, crystals, color, and explored a lot of therapies like theta healing, source awakening, angel work, all of the things, mediumship. I explored the whole range of energetic therapies, but actually that then brings you into this realm of working with spirituality. And I then ended up down a path working in Tantra, and that's actually where a lot of my relationship work comes from. But alongside this, I trained as a Kundalini Yoga teacher, and more recently a student, and now a teacher in A Course in Miracles. Now I'm telling you all of this because I'm going to get onto it in a moment, but for me, this is actually where I became incredibly aware of women's issues. And I think my perspective of women's issues is often different to those that we talk about commonly. And so it's those that I want to talk about today. Now, first of all, I want to say that how having a spiritual discipline has changed me is it's created such a focus on deep inner work, and it's taken away the control from the outside world as to how my world is steered. And it has allowed me to focus on the big picture as opposed to get sort of stuck in life's crinkles. So when I was training as a Kundalini Yoga teacher, we were taught about the dawning of the Aquarian Age. And I want to talk to you a little bit about it because I see how we're here, how we're in the situation we're in. And I'm going to come onto that more shortly. But it's so interesting because this stuff that I'm about to tell you about, this was predicted 5,000 years ago. What is going on globally right now is not an accident. And the reason why it's so important to talk about women's issues now is because when we start seeing the bigger picture, then we start to see how much responsibility we have in changing it. And that for me is the really exciting thing. And when I'm talking about women's issues, I'm really excited today because, International Women's Day, and there's loads of newspapers reporting on new incentives for menopausal women in the workplace. They're starting to try and take the stigma out of menopause in the workplace. So there's now suddenly this focus being put on menopause, like for the first time ever, which is super exciting for me anyway, as a menopausal woman, and also working with a lot of menopausal women, because we have to change how the system works, because it doesn't work for women with women's issues. It just doesn't. I mean, I'll give you a brief example, but, you know, I get clients coming to see me who were diagnosed in their maybe late teens or early 20s with something like endometriosis. And without getting too geeky about it, endometriosis is when we've got too much estrogen in the body. And what the medical stance is to give you more estrogen, is to put you on the pill. And then I'm seeing women who end up with strokes and DVTs and awfulness because of this really myopic way that women's health is dealt with. So I could, you know, spend my time here today ranting about women's health issues, and also the fact that, you know, in terms of our menstrual cycle, it's still okay, you know, so often for comments to be made about if we've got premenstrual syndrome, that maybe it's that time of the month and maybe we're just a bit hormonal, as opposed to this understanding that for us, it's like we just see the world differently then. So there is this huge issue in how women's issues are being dealt with on a global scale. And it's so exciting that we're starting to make headway into that. I mean, what was that meme a few years ago, you know, about having the perfect bikini body? Because, oh my gosh, isn't there so much pressure for that? And wasn't it that meme that just kind of went, buy a bikini, put it on your body? And this backlash that we're starting to see of, stop telling me what good looks like for my body. Stop telling me how I should behave. Stop telling me to smile. You know, if I want to be grumpy and if I want to be radical, then that's absolutely my right. And so there is this huge hangover from how our female ancestors were dealt with, and we are still learning how deep that ingrained conditioning runs, and we're only just starting to change it. And all of that is very, very exciting to me. And we have been predicted this for 5,000 years. And so that's where I want to start, because I see that when we have an understanding of this big picture, that's when we can get our anxiety under control. That's when we can start questioning how the doctor wants to approach our illness. That's when we can start saying it's not okay that the choices for menopausal women are so minimal. It's not okay that women have a gender pay gap. It's not okay. But we have to have this understanding of the bigger picture and not be in fear. So let's backtrack. So Kundalini Yoga, I actually don't practice the yoga anymore. It was a huge spiritual awakening for me, and I've subsequently found a different path. But Kundalini Yoga was brought in the 1960s from India by Yogi Bhajan. And he brought it to the West to aid us with the transition into the Aquarian Age. Now, the hippies have been singing about the dawning of the Aquarian Age since the 1960s. And of course, many people know that actually the Aquarian Age started on December the 21st, 2012. So all of that end of the Mayan calendar stuff was actually the end of an age. Now, what that means is, there's a phenomenon with our planet, with how our planet aligns. And basically, it's a phenomenon where the axis of our planet moves very slowly westward. And so we actually don't just spin, we spin and move. Yeah, that's west, isn't it? I never know, he's from west. So we actually move, and we move westward. And so what that means is that as the planet starts to turn, our direct heavens above us, they actually change. And a whole cycle, a whole rotation takes 25,000 years. And so if you divide that by 12, it's about 2,000 years that we're in a constellation. So this isn't the same, obviously, as our star sign constellations. It's the whole heavenly bodies that are above us. And in astrology, I'm no astrologer. I have a bit of an interest, but it's also not particularly where any of my big knowledge lies. But I do know this. In astrology, so this is called the Procession of the Equinoxes. And it's very interesting because unlike our star signs, which, you know, starts with Aries and then moves on to Gemini, I think, and then Taurus, or whichever way it goes, we go that way. The precession of the equinoxes, because of how the planet spins, actually goes backwards to what we know it as. So it feels like we're going backwards. So each of the ages has its own quality, and it's defined in a masculine or a feminine way. Now, it's not about male or female. Both men and women have the masculine and the feminine within them. And of course, not wanting to be too heteronormative, obviously then we get into the gender non-binary sort of aspects, which is, I don't know which I identify with necessarily. Or I don't identify with either, or whatever. So we have this, the qualities of the masculine and the feminine, and we have basically spent 5,000 years in a masculine dominant time. So we are just finishing the Age of Pisces. Now, the Age of Pisces was it was a time of greed, war, corruption, obfuscation. This is predicted. So there was something called the Hindu Puranas that 5,000 years ago, they talked about what was going to be coming. And so they understood on a basic level this procession of the equinoxes. And it was just predicted that in 5,000 years, we were going to have this time of greed, war, corruption. And it's incredible, really. And before that, so going backwards, we would have then had the time of Aries, because that's where it would be moving. Now, it's really interesting as well, because when you start to look at this from a bigger picture, and again, I'm never ever being anti-religious. I'm a teacher of spirituality, but the more into spirituality we get, the more that there are parallels with religion. It's just that religion has dogma, spirituality doesn't. If people have faith, and that's great. So this isn't what I'm about to say, isn't to take away from any people's beliefs, but it's very interesting because each of the ages, so the Piscean age, the Aquarian age, the Taurian age, they actually had a prophet. So let's just think back. So obviously the most recent prophet for, actually it's not true. There have been many more recent prophets. Obviously, Muhammad was only 500 years ago or something. But in terms of Christianity, we had obviously Jesus, and he ushered in the age of the Piscean age. And what's really interesting is we actually represent often Jesus with a fish. And of course we say, well, that's because of the miracles, the fish and the loaves. But actually, isn't it interesting? Fish, Pisces, our prophet is represented by a fish. Before that, the prophet was Moses. And of course, that was a big upsurge in Judaism. And Moses was represented by, or Judaism was represented by the ram, and that had a big connection to Moses. And actually a ram's horn is still used in the Jewish faith, I believe. And if you remember from any biblical studies, when Moses came down from the mountain with the 10 Commandments, he actually got really angry because people were worshipping the golden calf. And of course, that represents Taurus. So we have in the Bible, or in our religious texts, we have this kind of acknowledgement of these different ages. So it's also said that Jesus says, I will be with you until the end of the age. And then it goes on to say that you will be met by the water bearer. I believe the phrase is something like, in the courtyard you will meet the water bearer. And so it's almost like we're being set up to understand that we're moving into this Aquarian age. So what it means is that for 5,000 years, Pisces and Taurus, we've had this masculine energy. We've had 5,000 years of a patriarchal system. So patriarchy isn't about men or female. It's about a hierarchical system. It's a whole way of looking at how society works. So for 5,000 years, we've had patriarchy. And yet the Aquarian age is completely different. So sadly, although we started moving into Aquarius in December 2012, the jury is actually out as to when we are finally in Aquarius, because if you imagine this axis is rotating, it depends on when the planets all finally have moved into that constellation. But I know that for a really big key time was actually May 2020. And of course, oh my goodness, literally the whole world collapsed in May 2020. So that's really interesting, huh? But I mean, some people say it's around about 2023. Other people say it's not going to be for another 300 years. And what we're doing here is we're just sowing the seeds. And I kind of go, oh gosh, I can't do this for another few hundred years. But when we understand the big process, we can just trust, and we understand that we are here, you know, now for a reason. So it was always going to be a very bumpy transition. It's why Yogi Bhajan brought Kundalini Yoga. The whole purpose of Kundalini Yoga is to strengthen our nervous and glandular systems for the transition into the Aquarian age. Like, this is no coincidence. It is really tough and intense right now. And even down to the fact that it feels like time's speeding up, doesn't it? And a lot of people talk about how it's because we are literally 1 foot still in each age. So what's difficult is this duality. We are half in the feminine age, we're half in this masculine age, and we feel that duality, we feel that conflict. And you know, I look around for evidence all the time, and even 20 years ago no one did any recycling. 15 years ago, I don't even know when that started, but it really wasn't that long ago, and no one even thought about it. So all these things now that we have started to take note about, it wasn't their time before, and now it is. It's like the stuff that's coming into our consciousness is such a sign for me of the feminine age. So the Aquarian age is going to be defined as, or is defined as, it's about a collective or autonomous people working together for the greater good. The big institutions will eventually have to crumble because they don't work for us anymore. We see that. We see that, you know, our governments, I mean, really, let's be honest, it's who you know, it feels like a bunch of kids fighting, and it just feels shocking that this is how we run our countries. And one of my friends always says, you know, if aliens did actually land and say, take us to your leaders, and we take them to 300 people leading the world, they'd go, really? How many billion of you in this lot? It's, you know, our institutions aren't working for us. We even understand now that our financial systems are highly fraudulent, and it's all rubbish. It's not based on anything. No, you know, a pound no longer represents however much gold it used to represent. If it was a pound, that would be really funny, but I don't think it was. But it no longer represents that. It is just this fake money. It's not, nothing is real anymore. And so, of course, it's real if we haven't got it and we're struggling. I'm not saying that. I'm not diminishing anyone's experience of not having it, but it's like, it's not real. They can just literally conjure it up. So all of the things that we have held dear have to drop away. But that's bumpy. It's really, really bumpy. And these institutions are going to crash, and we are seeing it play out. And the difficulty is the amount of fear that brings up in us, because of course we are scared about losing our homes, losing our jobs, being able to put food on the table for our children. And one of the things I really wanted to share with you today is, when we see the big picture, we can go, okay, it's bumpy, but I understand why. So what's interesting is, I mean, this might not end up being true. You know, we've got 2,000 years, let's see what happens. But it's kind of believed that we don't need a prophet for the Aquarian age, because it's more about inner guidance, learning our inner guidance, and then working together in a conscious collective. And, you know, what happens then? So spirituality, our inner connection, is connection to source, as opposed to necessarily needing the priest or the vicar or, you know, whoever it was that was the connection to source. It's much more about how do I find my connection. So the Aquarian age is this time it's a feminine time, and it's time for collaboration. It's this uprising. It's about collaboration instead of competition, compassion instead of comparison and judgment, autonomy, collectives. This is what we're cultivating. This is finally the time that we are moving out of a patriarchal system. We can feel it. It's all around us. There is so much more interest and acknowledgement of issues. I mean, we saw it last year with the Black Lives Matter protests. We're seeing so much evidence of uprising, of collaboration, of not just sweeping things under the carpet. Things like Extinction Rebellion. Personal development is no longer a privilege. It's actually, it feels like the most important thing we can be doing because we're dealing with our own inner world. So it was through this journey and this understanding, once I started healing my core wounds and my self-belief issues, that I actually became a radical feminist. It certainly wasn't something that I had historically, because I don't think I really understood what it meant. And now, I call out casual sexism whenever I see it, and it's sad because it's still so commonplace. So patriarchy just doesn't serve anyone anymore. It doesn't serve men. Brené Brown talks about how a guy started talking to her after one of her book signings, and he said, "Why do you always focus your work on women?" And she said, "Well, because that's what I know." And he said, "Yeah, but the problem is my wife and daughter won't let me be vulnerable. They won't let me off the white horse." And so he didn't have the opportunity to be vulnerable. So patriarchy isn't about what men have done to us. It's also what we have done to them, and what they have done to themselves, and what we have done to ourselves. It's just conditioning, and we are learning to break free of it. So patriarchy is absolutely what destroys our planet for profit. It strips our soils of nutrients and cages animals so they can lie on their side so that we can house more of them to farm them in a smaller area. This is what patriarchy does. Capitalism is ultimately patriarchy. It's absolutely vital that we start to see a different way. So women's issues and women's empowerment lies at the absolute core of how we move from a patriarchal society. Because women, or the feminine, the qualities of the feminine, which, as I said earlier, also men have, are intuitive. It's emotional. We're relational. And I'm not saying that men don't have these gifts, but their brains are wired differently. And thank God for that, because it's in that difference where, when we can come together without distortion, that magic happens. Men work more logically, they're more rational, they're more objective. And these are great, great qualities. But bringing the two together, absolutely beautiful. But in a patriarchal society, we say, well, the women being all emotional, intuitive, that's not helpful, because I need you to quantify that, and I need you to justify it, and we need to be able to put that on a spreadsheet. We're learning how to make room for the feminine qualities in both men and women. So the problem is that we have now seen so many people act in a distorted way. So when a woman, or the feminine aspects, are distorted, they can come out as anxious, paranoid, we can nag, we can be very, I don't want to use the word over emotional, but we can lose any sense of logic. When the masculine's qualities are distorted, it can be clinical, it can be incredibly hard with no compassion. And so we need to do the work to become undistorted, so that we are actually in this place of understanding our qualities and understanding the other qualities that are brought to us. The only way that they become undistorted is by breaking through our conditioning and being in radical self-love for both the masculine and the feminine. So I'm going to say that again. The only way that they can become undistorted is when we break through our conditioning and come from a place of radical self-love. And our conditioning is what has been forced upon us from the moment that we are born all the way through our lives. This is not about blaming our parents. It's the whole of our society. Parents don't want autonomous children because they want them to put their shoes on and go to school. But then, as teenagers, we're not taught how to become autonomous because then, maybe we've gone to school or we're at college and we're not meant to be autonomous there either. And then suddenly we need to be paying our taxes, so we're not going to be autonomous here either. So this is absolutely an act of revolution, is coming from this place of radical self-love and allowing ourselves to go on the journey to claim it. So when we are in this place of radical self-love and being able to embrace our qualities from without distortion and embracing the qualities that we don't have and pulling them towards us too in our tribe and making sure that we've got this gorgeous balance, that's when we make huge change. And we are able to stop the internal attack and actually start being at one with ourselves. And by being at one, we are then compassionate, we are loving, we're graceful. And that's the same, masculine or feminine qualities. When we're at one, we are loving, compassionate, graceful. And it's from here that we are able to stand strongly in our fierce love with boundaries. So boundaries create, this space for us to be able to stand in our fierce, fierce love. And that is also then an act of revolution. When we are so deeply in our self-love, we will no longer be okay with profit being prioritized over integrity. And we will no longer become part of the machine that consumes animals that have been treated badly. We won't allow our governments to go to war where other women and their children and their husbands will be put at risk. We will not allow our planet to be ripped apart, to put more buildings that are going to be empty, that we rip apart our planet for everything and we don't question it. One of my big bugbears, I've got loads of crystals, but I'm never buying another one ever, because think about it. We are ripping them out of our planet and our planet is in crisis. And if they are meant to heal, then we have to heal the planet. So we've got to stop ripping them out. There are enough for us to buy without ripping up more. It's like we have to start questioning and thinking about, what are we doing? Do we deserve to heal? Yes, but maybe we could start a swap-a-thon with people to swap our crystals. We have to think outside the box. We can't just keep churning up our planet for profit. This is a great, great time to be a woman. I am so, so grateful. We have so much to be grateful for. And if we actually have any kind of spiritual beliefs, then so many of us believe that we chose to be here now. We chose this. This is one of the hardest times in humanity, but we chose it. We're here to do a job. And so we've got to do that job. And I think about my gratitude to my ancestors, to our ancestors. And I also grieve for the lives that they couldn't have and what we take for granted and what my 70-year-old daughter is able to take for granted. And I'm delighted that she is, because her job will be to, to build on this and to capitalize on the work that we do and on the work that they did. I think about my mum, and she's 76, I think, 75, 76. And I think about what she's been through. She couldn't have a bank account when she was younger without her husband or father signing for it. She couldn't just walk into a bank and get a bank account. There wasn't freely available abortion. There wasn't freely available birth control. There was no benefits. There was no housing. When she was a single mother to my older sister, my grandmother had to look after her because there was no one else. Like it just, she didn't live in the society that we live in. It was really challenging. And I am so grateful that that's not my experience or my daughter's experience. And that means that we've got a big job to do. My grandma was born in 1905 and she couldn't go to school despite the fact that she had her scholarship because her mother needed her to earn money. She had to stay home and do the chores, and she also had to work. This is so alienous to us now. And it's really easy to go, oh, it's not like the old days, you know, it was awful back then. Like, you know, wow, the kids today don't know how good they've got it. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, isn't it great that we don't have to walk a mile to get water to then do the washing up by hand? We have got time to do work, to build on what they did for us. And so we don't have to do those things now. And that experience is alien to us. And yet here we are, still thwarted by a failing and outdated sociological system, but not just by that. We are allowing that to actually cause us to not move forward. The thing that's stopping us, really, let's be honest about it, the thing that's really stopping us as women is our self-belief. Yes, there is a glass ceiling in industry. And yes, there are gender pay gaps still, and that must be rebalanced. And yes, the way that we deal with women's health is actually criminal. And one of my massive bugbears is the use of the word hysterectomy, which of course can be traced back to women having their wombs removed to stop us being hysterical. You know, any of those connotations have to be addressed, have to be, and fought for, because even in those kind of words, that's where our equality is still a way off. You know, that is the equivalent, and it actually makes me feel sick to say this, but that is the equivalent of a man having a testicle removed and it being called an idiotectomy. It is not okay. It is not okay. It's a big campaign I want to start, because any of those kind of connotations, the word hysterectomy literally kind of makes me feel like this. So yes, equality is still a way off, but you know what? In the words of Radiohead, we do it to ourselves, we do, and that's what really hurts. And how do we do that? We compare ourselves to each other, we compare ourselves to celebrities, to magazines, to anybody else. We compare ourselves to the person sat next to us on the bus. We compare ourselves all the time. That is a patriarchal trick to stop us believing in ourselves. We've also been taught that the Disney dream is real and that a prince is going to come and save us. And so what happens is we end up in relationship, we lose ourselves, we lose our identities, and we put all of our power into this other person who's going to love us unconditionally for the rest of our lives. So we caretake, we put up with stuff that we shouldn't have to put up with, because on some level, we are still holding on to the fear that without a man, there is no security. Or without a relationship, there is no security. Now, whilst you might be able to sit there and go, no, well, I don't believe that, then that's fantastic. And I celebrate that. But I still see a huge amount of it in my clinic. Caretaking, putting up with stuff, or someone shouting at me in relationship, and that's okay because they were just in a bad mood. No, it's not okay. Either way, this isn't just about women. Like, it's not okay at anybody. But this is where equality is still a way off. So if we're caretaking in relationships, or we're putting our needs last, and oh my gosh, I see that all the time in my clinic. You know, it's that adage, put your own oxygen mask on first. If we are cutting our bodies and pumping them full of loads of stuff so that we can buy into the belief that younger is better, And we were obsessively exercising or obsessively dieting so that we can have bodies that are acceptable in today's culture. Or we're shopping obsessively so that we can have clothes that look right and so we can fit in and feel better about ourselves. And just so that we can, be deemed as what's hot right now. Only when we stop this can we actually make the change that needs to happen in the world for real equality. Doing the work on our radical self-love, our radical honesty, learning non-violent communication and action, moving our beautiful bodies with compassion and empathy, nourishing our beautiful bodies properly without any self-sabotage, ridding ourselves of toxicity and empowering everyone around us whilst calling out the bullshit and the lack of transparency that we see everywhere. We see it on the news, we see it in the governments, we see it everywhere, sometimes in our partners, sometimes in our friends. Obfuscation is everywhere. And it's only when we call it out with directness and compassion, that's when we will really be in an uprising, and that's when we'll see the full potential of the feminine. The Dalai Lama said, the world will be saved by the Western woman. I believe him, but first the Western woman has to save herself. And she has to stop allowing anxiety to numb her and stop her intuition. And also to stop bad diet and self-sabotage. That stops her capacity to be at her most powerful, because then we can sit there and beat up on ourselves that we ate the cake and we're not a size 8. And so that I can't possibly be powerful because I'm not good enough. That's what we have to stop, this vicious cycle of not believing in our true magnificence. The job that we have here is to get over our shit and to stand incredibly tall in our fierce strength and be the change that we want to see in the world. We can use radical self-love as an act of rebellion against the bullshit, against the fear, against the obfuscation. Question everything. How can a crystal be mined ethically? We're ripping it out of the planet. That's not ethical. Like I said earlier, trade your crystals with friends. Ask yourself, how can a cooked chicken in a supermarket only cost $3.99 or $2.99 worse? How can that chicken be raised? How can it be raised ethically? How can it then be prepared? How can it be cooked? How can someone be paid to do all of that? And that only be £3.99. And if your head goes straight to the fear of cost, then work can be done to address those limiting beliefs and your fear. And also maybe we have to readjust our expectations. We have so much beautiful work to do. And we are the generation to do it. I've said for a really long time that I truly believe that our generation, and I'm coming up 45, but by our generation, I actually mean, the sort of late 20s up to the 50s. I believe that what our generation is contributing to the world is this breaking down the stigma of doing self-work. It was our generation that brought in the Kilroys and the Oprahs and those things where these talk shows, some of them are quite toxic. I understand that, like the Jeremy Kyle type stuff, and some of it is really toxic, but we've normalized talking about things. And so we are the generation to do it and to encourage the younger generations to build on that work, because their job will be something different. This is how we as a generation are furthering humanity. We have amazing collectives that are growing up all over the place, supporting us, empowering us, teaching us to be in the collaboration, not competition, not comparisons. These help us to be the best versions of ourselves. We have amazing leaders and teachers, and we do have time because we generally aren't hand washing the clothes. And we literally have the planets aligning for the first time in 2000 years. And they're calling us to rise up and stand in our magnificence. And that is the potential that we have. And that, for me, is what is the beauty of things like Women's Day, is the opportunity to talk about this. So that is all I have for you. Love, love, love to you all. Happy International Women's Day. And if you'd like to get involved, then please check me out, Claire Snowdon-Darling, Instagram, Facebook, clairesnowdondarling.com. There is an awful lot of free resources, radical self-love work. There is a 12-hour online program called Reclaim Your Life, which is to do this radical self-love. Thank you so much for your time.